I'm interested in that you make a couple of guesses about why we're so willing to believe these myths. We need the myth of the beginning of the U.S. We need an origin myth. We need a way to have something wonderful to latch onto. Oh, the Pilgrims were hardworking. But they were also incredibly disorganized. And I'm curious why you think it is that we are so poorly educated about our history, and we're so willing to just take the myths when we've now sort of discovered it. Is it just all comes back to the same thing for you then?
No, I mean, I think there are a couple things at work. One is that this history was largely written by Protestant New Englanders soon after this nation was created, and so they sort of exalted their own and diminished the contributions of any Catholics and Spanish and French. They also diminished Southerners. After all, Jamestown precedes Plymouth by 13 years as the first permanent English colony on this continent, yet somehow Plymouth still is number one. That was partly about the Civil War and sort of Northerners not being very fond of the South. So there are a number of factors, but I think it's mainly just at some point we have so much invested in these stories. Here in Columbus, you have your Santa Maria on the river, even though Columbus never came to North America. We all celebrate Thanksgiving, even though the Pilgrims don't really mention it in their journals. They have, one line, and it's not a Thanksgiving. There's no mention of a rock at all at Plymouth. So, we have these stories, and we create holidays around them and pageantry, and it's hard to toss that out.
I want to be clear, though, that the Santa Maria was sent here right after. He really came. That's the.
He came right up the river.
Yeah, it was right up the Scioto to the Olentangy, and
it
was no problem. He was looking for the Northwest Passage. That's the myth that the history that we tell in Columbus, and that's why we're named after him. Do you see the same thing with your children's education now? Do you see? I'm just curious. After you've done all this writing, you come home and you have, I think, one child.
Yeah, two sons in elementary school. So I do see this. I would say, at least since my own childhood, back in the Dark Ages, there's much more sensitivity to the native story and the African American story. So, for instance, Jamestown will be taught as the meeting of three cultures. So I would say in that sense it's improved. But in terms of including the complexity in all these other stories, the Spanish and the French and others, I don't think it's changed much. There's some regional differences. If you grow up in the Southwest, you're going to get a little more of that. But generally speaking, no. I think we still cling to the same old set of quote-unquote facts.
I suppose part of that is watering it down for kids who probably wouldn't understand, who might not necessarily grasp all the implications of the things that occurred or wouldn't want to face.
I don't know that that's it. One, with two boys, I know they love gore. I mean, I think they would be, and little girls too, I think they would be much more excited about the story if you told them all about the cannibalism and the murder and the mayhem. But I think it's also, we're getting even more and more test-based, less time for teachers to stray off the kind of conventional narrative. So it's not just this era that's forgotten. Between the Mayflower and the Revolution, how many Americans know much about the colonial period? Again, we just sort of skip over it. We tick off, a few points in our history, and that's it.
So hopefully someday soon there'll be a question on exams: how many people were eaten? How many early explorers were eaten by cannibals before?
I should point out that the only hard evidence we have of cannibalism in this period is Europeans eating each other. There's actually no accounts or no reliable accounts of Indians eating natives. Indians eating Europeans.
Even though that was the basis, I think, for Caliban in Shakespeare and things like that. It's sad, really.
In fact, the word cannibal comes from Columbus's first voyage. He hears that from the natives. They're trying to scare them away and talk about these man-eaters, and he hears the word as cannibal, and that's where we get it.
And one of the other themes I noticed in the book that I thought was really interesting is that people, you get this view of these uneducated the natives and they're always portrayed as sort of childlike and things, but they were really clever often about sending them, oh no, there's gold over there, If you go over to that place where it's usually their enemies, they have lots of gold. And so the conquistadors pick up and they go over and kill a bunch of other people somewhere else.
Well, the Indians are not only obviously very clever, they tend to be bigger than Europeans. The Europeans are kind of dressed all wrong for the climate. They can't feed themselves. They have no women and children with them generally. These Indians, you get a sense, often look at these newcomers as rather pathetic, which may be one reason they underestimated how much damage they could do.
Well, one of the things I'd like to do now is I'd like to launch into like a short answer kind of things that gets your... It's stolen from in the actor's studio. What's the best part about being a writer?
Best part, I would say freedom, and that's not true for all writers, but I'm lucky enough now to work full-time as a book author. And, day to day, I'm my own boss. And, every few years, yes, I have to deliver a manuscript, and I work with an editor, but I think I have much more control over my work life than most people.
Okay. What's the worst part?
The same thing in a way. There's no one there on a daily basis to kind of lean over you and make you work. It's all got to come from you. And, staring at a blank computer screen day after day can get to you. So I would say the lack of structure in a way can also be very hard.
What's the best writing job you've had?
I think the best writing job I've had is the one I have now. I loved doing journalism, but I think it's a young person's game. You need an extraordinary amount of energy. It's totally incompatible with family life. So I don't miss it. I like what I do now.
What's the worst writing job you've had?
Well, again, the horrible jobs are kind of fun to talk about in retrospect. I think for almost every journalist, your first job, where I remember I worked at a small paper in Indiana, my first newspaper job, and the first day I was there, I had to go knock on the door of the mother of someone who had just been picked up for axe murder and essentially say, how do you feel about your son being an axe murderer? That kind of... trenches journalism, was not always fun.
I love the picked up for axe murder. There's a separate category for there's murder and then there's axe murder. You've been charged with axe murder. What would you do if you weren't a writer? What other profession?
I would be in trouble if I weren't a writer. I have no other skills, and I'm not sure I have that skill. Perhaps teaching. Originally, I wanted to be a historian, be a professor at some beautiful campus like this. It's a little hard to do that without an advanced degree, but maybe someplace would take me.
What genre haven't you written that you'd like to try? Do you have a romance novel?
I've never written fiction, at least not intentionally, and actually don't have a lot of desire. I love reading it, but I don't feel compelled to write it, which is just as well. There are enough novelists out there. No, I want to write a straight history without any antics. So that's something I've never done that I would like to do.
Do you get a lot of feedback from historians about the kind of writing you do, whether they positive or negative? Do they communicate with you?
Yeah, and I always try and work pretty closely with some historians to make sure I've got my facts right and bounce my interpretation off them. So yeah, the feedback I would say is really 99% positive, and I think most professional historians want to reach a wider audience, and so they're happy to see general readers learning about a period that doesn't usually get a lot of attention.
Who's your biggest influence as a writer?
I would say maybe Studs Terkel. When I was young, before I got into writing, I remember reading some of his books where he just did very straight interviews with people, although there was a lot more art to it than maybe there appears to be. And I think perhaps just listening to people tell their stories and realizing that everybody has a good story to tell.
What's your secret vice of an author or a genre?
I'm mortified to say I have a fantasy baseball team. And every day I probably devote 15 or 20 minutes when I could be reading The New Yorker or some great novel to reading analysis of yesterday's ball games. And I have to say the writing doesn't tend to be that strong.
Is your team doing well?
Second place. So, you asked, if I crap out as a writer, maybe I could start writing a fantasy baseball column.
All right. Well, I thank you very much
for
talking to us today, and you have a great day.
Thank you. You too.